I don't know if she was around the same age or,
All right, so you're here today with the Breath of Fresh Controversy podcast. My name is Zach,
Jay?
and we're going to have ZP on here again as a guest. ZP won, what was it, an award or a grant for a presentation on leadership and hazing, correct me if I'm wrong, that also gave some neat insight into how we teach leadership as well, right?
Right.
So I will let you take it away and lay out the presentation that you won the award for, and then we'll kind of chit chat about it here. But yeah, go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, so the competition was it was a campus speak competition. So that's a public speaking company that does campus speakers. And they did a contest for a new program that they wanted to offer. And so I submitted mine, which is about the two main styles of leadership that my research really focuses on and how they relate to hazing and engagement. And so what I talk about is there's two real styles of leadership when it comes to the way that we think about and teach leadership. One is the kind of traditional style, and that is what I deem as the Leia style of leadership. So anyone that's seen Star Wars knows that when Leia gets rescued in the first movie, she is waiting in her dungeon. They come in, they get her, but then as they're trying to escape, she grabs the gun from Han, shoots the stormtroopers, breaks their way into the trash compactor, and saves herself. Right? That's the style of leadership we typically teach students today in college, right? Like, if you need something done, do it yourself, right? Yeah. If you want to be a leader, like, you need to take charge, you need to make sure that everyone understands, like, this is what needs to happen, this is how we need to get there, you need to set the tone and the style for what that looks like. And we know that that works for some students, but we also have been seeing, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, a real gap in leadership development, particularly in our men, in this area around, why is it that we can get some of our men engaged and some of our women engaged with this style of leadership but not others? So why is it that we are seeing this engagement gap here? So as I started my research and looked into it more, I discovered that there's really a second style of leadership that we never talk about, right? And I deem it the Dorothy Gale style of leadership. So anyone that's seen The Wizard of Oz would say that Dorothy wins her movie in a very different way than how Leia wins her movie. Right? Dorothy gets dropped into this completely unknown world, similar to how Leia is, and is asked, rescue yourself in a similar kind of scenario. But what does she do instead? She's put on this path on the yellow brick road to Oz, right? And she meets a bunch of friends along the way of various talents and abilities, gets them to understand that, what you think you're lacking, you actually have in spades, right? So at the end of the movie, when she's kidnapped by the Wicked Witch of the West, who's the first one to come up with a plan? It's the Scarecrow, right? So the one who thought he had no brain is the one that comes up with a plan to save her. Who's the first one to charge in to rescue her? The Cowardly Lion. Who's the one that cries himself to rust at the end of the movie because Dorothy's leaving? The Tin Man, right? So we see that Dorothy instead is able to empower those around her to find their own abilities and to find their own successes, and doesn't need to be the one necessarily rescuing herself in the same way that Leia does, but instead telling others, you are enough. You can be a leader yourself. You can be this person that you think you can be, and empowering them to be that style of leadership is one that we're not teaching right now. And once I started working with my students in that style and started teaching them to say, you don't have to be Leia. Like, you can be Dorothy. You can find people who have talents that you don't have and have abilities that you don't have, bring them into your organization and empower them to be successful. And that is leadership in and of itself. We saw our hazing rates drop dramatically. We saw our engagement levels skyrocket. We saw our students more willing to retain in their organizations, more willing to graduate, performing at a higher academic level across the board. Right, all because we just shifted our language a little bit around what we were looking at as far as talking about leadership. So that sponsored the second half of this program, right? So if we know that our students fall into these two categories, how are we teaching our students about this, right? All we ever really think about is the Leia style of leadership, and so everything out there right now is focused on teaching that style of leadership. That kind of advisor, I like to call the Yoda style of advisor. So if you think about what Yoda does with Luke, Yoda and Dagobah shows Luke everything that he needs to do to be successful. He lifts the ship up to show him that the Force is powerful. He does all of the work with him, runs around with him in the forest, all that jazz. That's how we typically teach the Leia style of leadership. But when Luke went to fight Vader at the end of that movie, it failed, right? Because he is not that style of leader. He's a Dorothy. So what does Dorothy get when she needs someone to empower her? She gets a Glinda, right? Glinda is the other style of teaching when it comes to this. What does Glinda do for Dorothy? Glinda gives Dorothy everything that she needs to be successful right at the beginning of the movie. She gives her the ruby slippers, says follow the yellow brick road and you'll find your way home. That's all the instructions she gives her.
And then she's gone, right?
And then she just disappears. And lets Dorothy kind of figure out her own thing, right? And
so
then,
look, we'd have a movie. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a movie. She just click the heels right there, you know.
But the one time that Dorothy needs to be saved, when she's in the poppy fields that are cursed by the witch, Glinda empowers her and saves her in such a way that doesn't remove Dorothy's authorship of her own story, right? She sends a snowstorm and does it in such a way that she doesn't even show up there, but makes it so that Dorothy can be rescued in a way that doesn't feel like Dorothy is losing her own ability to chart her own course, right? And so, well, Dorothy knows that something happened, right? The snow didn't just come out of nowhere, right? She doesn't know who did it and why. That is a completely different style of leadership and a completely different style of education that we're not teaching our advisors right now. We're not looking at when it comes to this style of leadership training. So this won a $30,000 grant to really look into that more, right? Why is it that we're not teaching this? Why is it that we're not having our students learn, you can be something more than just Leia, right? If you think about Luke and Leia as characters, Luke was taught in the Leia style and it failed. He lost a hand, he almost died, right? But then when he goes off and thinks more about what Ben Kenobi taught him and really tries to embrace who Ben was, who was much more of a Glinda style of advisor, he comes back in the third movie as a completely different style of leader. Right, and is much more capable and much more able to do what he needs to do to save Han and to rescue the day.
Right.
That's the boiled down version of 5 years of research.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of a lot of different things. There's I think a hippy dippy song from the early '70s. I think it was America. They had a whole line in there. Oz didn't give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have, and it makes me think of that. Also makes me think of, and I don't know if this would be more the Dorothy way. There's a line out there. Something about adversity introduces a man to himself. It can be a woman as well. I mean, just how maybe sometimes people don't know what they're capable of till they sort of have to face their problems.
Yeah, if you think about who Dorothy was in the first part of the movie, right, she was a complainer. She cried because she didn't want to work and she ran away from home, and then her dog bit her neighbor and blamed the neighbor for it, right? It is very much not a hero. Right, not somebody you would want to follow, but then gets dropped into Oz and has to figure out her own stuff, and then all she is really herself, right? She lets go of the fact that she can't complain and depend on other people anymore, and starts to befriend everyone around her. And then once she starts to realize, once I can take control of my own life, people start to flock to her and want to follow her and want to be with her and want to be her friends, right? So to your point, right, until Dorothy gets put into adversity, she's not a real leader either, right? But once she gets tested, she proves worthy.
Yeah. And what a girl power story as well, going way back then. I don't know when Frank Baum wrote the book originally, but the movie came out in the late 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were talking about this a little bit off mic, but yeah, both of those are two older stories that are very woman power. And I think there's a lot of this radical leftist talk and mode of thinking nowadays where they like to look back at the past and, everything was wrong. Everything was terrible. Everything was racist. Everything was sexist. And then you have, well, what about Dorothy? What about Princess Leia?
Yeah, that was 1977. I was a kid. You guys weren't even here.
These were great female role models, right? And they both offer something different than the next, right? So
exactly.
So no, definitely. I think that is a very good point and very interesting. I think a really good way to look at it also is kind of like when you're teaching somebody how to swim, right? It's there's the old school, all right, just throw them in there, they'll learn. right? And then you
Oh,
come in
boy.
there and like,
That's
you know,
scary stuff.
hey, well, it is, right? It is scary, but some people learn to swim that way, right? And
Yeah.
then some people learn to, you know, you put the floaties on and you help them learn to kick and you help them, you know, learn to finagle their limbs until they get it right, and then you slowly take away the training wheels and everything, and
Right.
and they can
Yeah.
do it on their own, right?
Yeah.
So that's almost like another 2-second way to think about it, I think, as well, and it's important to have. I think for every individual, it's not that, you know, I don't think that it's that one way is right or the other, and I think that's kind of what you're saying with the Leia
Right.
approach, is that we have this idea that there is only one kind of leadership, and that's not true, right? And I think that what your research has sort of dove into really points that out. But I think this is also something that it's crucial to understand both forms of leadership in any kind of project you the listener or any of us here are undertaking, right? It's that sometimes you have to be more the Leia and sometimes you have to be more the Dorothy, and learning how to use both of those things and have those forms of leadership serve you, you know, for any sort of endeavor I think is really, really important.
In both
so-
and in both examples, there's a mixture of both styles of leadership, right? Like if you think about in The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion are 100% Leia leaders, right? They are like ready to go, charging in front, like guns blazing, trying to save her, right? And then the Scarecrow and Dorothy are Dorothy style leaders, right? They're like, let's talk, like pause, talk, think about what we need to do, and then make sure that everyone knows what's going on, right? But then similarly in Star Wars, Luke is a Dorothy and Leia is a Leia, right? But it's together that they run the Resistance, right? One can't run it without the other one, right?
Yeah, that's another way to look at it too. Yeah. So.
Completely unrelated, but perhaps related. I don't know. It's also kind of funny, and all it just goes around and around. It's just a crazy, wacky way. We're talking movies and leadership, and interestingly enough, strong female roles. And so in my little town here, they just played as a wintertime movie, The Shining. Are you familiar with that one? Okay. And I'm not a horror movie guy, but I love that movie. And that movie, of course, we won't go off on this too much, but it has its own folklore and urban legends on YouTube for those who are interested. Are just huge and wacky and crazy. They have a lot to do with director Stanley Kubrick. But what's interesting is the writer, you know, a great writer, Stephen King. I don't think I like him as a person, but excellent writer. He's done some excellent work, and so much of his work has been, you know, brought to the screen. And I guess he really did not like the finished product, The Shining. That I guess that's not just a legend, but that's truth. And it's funny to me. He wanted a version. Well, they actually redid the movie for TV, and I don't know if they did use Rebecca De Mornay, the actress. And I guess he originally wanted a wife, the Wendy role, to be more of a trophy wife, which I didn't understand at all. And I thought, and he didn't like Shelley Duvall, who they used in the film with Jack Nicholson. And I thought Shelley Duvall did a great job. And really, Shelley Duvall, her Wendy character, is also someone who is thrown all this adversity out of nowhere, you know, both physical and metaphysical at her, and like she handles it all very, very well. And you know, and that came out in 1980, I want to say, or late 70s or 1980, something like that. You know, so she was also a lot of girl power there.
Right. Yeah.
If you saw it, ZP, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from Stephen King's standpoint, in the book, the wife is very much a trophy wife, and it's supposed to create this juxtaposition between, like, similar to Dorothy, right? When push comes to shove, she, like, rises to the occasion, right? And I guess Shelley Duvall didn't really have that persona around her, right? She was already kind of self-actualized as a person going into the movie, right? And people knew that about her as an actress, right? And so I think that's where he's coming from, but to your point, I do think that the actress and like the character does that, right? She is like a house mom and like doesn't do anything except for what her husband wants, and then when he starts going crazy, she has to save herself, right?
And her kid.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and she does, you know, and she's very resourceful. Even the ghosts or the voices in Jack's head say that to him. Your wife is proved to be very resourceful, or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, And then Stephen King, of course, if we brought his politics in today and things he likes to say, it would also contradicts a lot of this, in my opinion. But now, you think she was already self-actualized? That's how you say that, because you're obviously familiar with the book as well.
Yeah.
I just skimmed it, so I can't say I read the book. So
yeah, I think the actress already, like, at least from what I haven't seen the movie in a long time, to be fair.
Oh, okay.
But
Should you watch it again?
from what I remember, she was pretty independent, kind of going into this scenario, right? Like, she was pretty, like, well versed in, like, taking care of the kid and doing, like, stuff around the house and, like, being much more than just, like, a hanger on, right? And in the book, the character was like 100% hanger on, right? Barely could raise the kid, right? Like, not at all functional as an adult, right? Which is like what made such an interesting counterpoint to like when all this started going down, right? Because it was much more of a testament to like her, like the human ability to survive when push comes to shove, right? And that's like the whole story, right?
Yeah.
Like, what better comparison point from like this person who can like barely make toast to like having to literally save herself and her son in this like tragic and horrible situation, right? And so it's about the human spirit in that way. Whereas like I would say from what I remember in the movie, she seemed more capable going into that scenario than the book character did,
Okay, I mean, for me, she seemed very much like just sort of a weakling housewife, who's told this, she had no idea what was coming, and, how any of us, man or woman or anybody, would be able to handle that kind of scenario. I mean, but she does. She's, again, very resourceful, and again, it really was a kind of a girl power movie, in a way.
The book is super girl empowering too.
Oh, it is? Okay. I probably need to go check the book out, and you probably need to refresh yourself on the movie.
It's good, though. I mean, it's a good point, right?
It is.
And I would say she's very much like a Dorothy in that moment, right? Like, she rises to the occasion. Whereas, like, Leia, the biggest comparison point between the two is, like, Dorothy's are able to, like, be dropped into a scenario and kind of figure out what they need to do without a lot of instruction, right? Leia had been raised from birth as a princess, right? Like, raised to be a leader, like, taught everything that she needed to do, and so it was logical for her to, like, run the resistance and to be a military commander and do all these things, because that's what she had been taught to do forever, right? Nothing that she ever encountered was, like, a surprise for her, really, right? She was just kind of going with what she was taught, right? But then think about Luke in that same scenario. Luke was taught to be a farmer, right? And then becomes this like leader of the resistance. And so he has to have a very different style of teaching when it comes to Obi-Wan Kenobi in that moment, right? And that's when he was successful, and then when he learned a different way, wasn't, and then when he went back to what Obi-Wan taught him, was again, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Thoughts on leadership, Zach?
Well, I mean, I think it's all very useful, and I think there are a lot of kind of modes of thinking where we kind of get stuck. I'm trying to think of like the psychological term for it, but a lot of people just kind of get stuck in a way of especially when it works, right? Mm-hmm. Like if something works for you, you're going to teach everybody, well, this is how to do it, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is that might be true for maybe half the people you tell that to, but the other half of the people are going to take your mode of being and they're going to try it out in the world and they're going to fail and they're going to go, well, it must be me. When the truth is, it could just be that mode of being. They might need to create something new, right? And I think this is a really interesting way to kind of explain that. You used the example of math before once, and I always had problems with math because I never showed my work. They were always like, show your work. I came up with the right answer. I came up with it
You do it in your head.
Really fast.
You do it in your head.
I would do it in my head.
Fast. You're like a race.
And they were always like,
was a race.
And they were always like, well, right. And some of that goes back to, I think it was like second grade, they came out with a program called Mad Math.
Yeah.
And it was literally
a race.
Literally was a race. And my second grade teacher, I remember at the parochial Christian school, would give us these little coins. And she had this little like M&M jar that was like a gumball machine, and you could put these little plastic coins that mirrored like a dime or a quarter or something. You could put it in there. And once you got so many, and then you could turn it, and you'd get a little candy. And so me being the fat ass that I was in second grade,
No.
I'm just kidding. But I loved M&Ms, whatever. I got so hardcore with this math stuff, and I remember I was in like third or fourth grade. I was like grades ahead. Like at one point I had to move. They took me from my class, and I would have to go into another the higher classroom's grade in order to do the mad math because I was so far ahead of like the people in my grade, and so that was all really crazy and cool. And then later on, when that translated to like later grade school and high school, I always had the problem with these math teachers going, show your work, or we're gonna start knocking your grades because you're not showing your work. And I'm like, but I got the right answer. Right? Why does it matter? And it kind of, I think that shows like there might be two modes of being, right? Like one is that we need to see your work, we need to see if you're messing up, we need to see where you're messing up. Whereas like for me, it was like I didn't have to draw everything out. I had some, like, I don't know, maybe I think more in pictures than I do in words, right? So there's something that, I don't know if it was Jung or a lot of psychologists have talked about this, about how people think they think. Right? Mm-hmm. And some people think they think in words. Other people think they think in pictures, very visual. Tesla was like that. Tesla was a very visual person. When he said he always thought in these pictures. And it's not that one is better than the other. A lot of smart people, I think in words. But then you do have these weird visionaries like Jung and Tesla who think in pictures. And they were like on some other crazy planet with the stuff that they came up with and gave to their different fields of study. So, but math was always something for me. It was like, well, they wanted you to do it a certain way, and I always had my way of doing it, and I was always right, and they would dock me because I couldn't do it their way. So,
right, math is the thing about the teaching component of what I research is that it applies to more than just leadership, right? It applies to all kinds of teaching, right? So math was the example when we were talking off camera or off mic about this. There are two real ways of teaching math, right? There's like the traditional Oxbridge model, which is like, here's the formula as plug and chug, right? Just like, here's do it, show all of your work so that we can see where you're making the mistakes and blah, 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 blah. The other is the Montessori model, which is really about teaching proofs, right? Teaching you how to derive the formulas yourself so that you can understand the fundamentals behind it, so that if you're thrown a random equation or thrown something out of the ordinary, you can figure it out with all of the tools you have available to you versus I need it to look exactly like this in order to do this equation, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of kids don't like math, right? Because they think math is so linear, where really math is as much an art as English is, right? It's all about deriving from the basics that you have what you can get out of it, right? Euclid and all of the original mathematicians were artists, right? If we think about what music is just math at the end of the day, right? All the scales are just the golden ratio breaking down different strings so that they can play music, right? The piano is like the most mathematical instrument that we know, right?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful instrument, and people think that art and math are so separated, but that's just, again, it's a flaw in the way that we teach things, right? And some of that comes back to how we talk about the American education system, right? The American education system is focused on testing, right? And so teachers are taught to test students, so they teach them in a way to help simplify that testing process, right? Versus teaching them education, right? If you actually taught them to learn, right, and taught them how to do the work versus taught them how to pass the test, right, people would learn more because they could figure out stuff on their own. It's harder. It's definitely harder to teach that way versus teaching to the test, but...
Yeah. I don't know what your opinions on this are, Jay, but the education system, I don't know. I always felt like there were a lot of teachers, especially in high schools, when I started noticing it more. I was like, they're like lazy. They just got really lazy about certain things, you know? You know, I mean, there was one guy. Oh, I'm gonna call him out. Bozak, I think is his name.
Oh, careful though. Let's not use last name.
Whatever. His name was Bozak, and he was.
We're talking about Big Ten people. I hope they don't notice us. But we don't want to call out like local teachers and stuff.
I don't care. He
all
probably doesn't work there anymore.
Limbaugh, but I don't want to.
He probably doesn't work there anymore. That guy showed up like way too high every day.
Wait, he was literally high? You think so?
Well, I didn't know it when I was in high school because I wasn't like into doing drugs and everything. But like listen to this. When I turned 21, 22, and I was able to go out downtown, this guy was like sloshed.
Let's call him Bozo.
Sure.
The other name was not his actual name.
Bozo.
We're changing the names to protect the innocent and whatever
teacher,
the guilty.
Mr. Bozo.
Okay.
And he's just goofy dude, man. Goofy dude. So, no, but he's one example, maybe a little bit more extreme example. Maybe he's just a little too immature and too young to be teaching. But there were a lot of them that just... There were like 3. I had like 2 or 3, and maybe I'm super lucky that I got 2 or 3 really good high school teachers. But there were 2 or 3 that like really took it seriously, and they were like teachers that I had that were way better than even the majority of my college professors. I don't even know if there were many college professors that were as educational or really taught me many things that I hold to this day. Then I can like Mr. Vu. Mr. Vukow.
Careful with the last names. Just leave the last names out.
I'm praising now. Vukow and Mr. Giovingo and Lake Geneva. Man, these guys were just amazing teachers.
There's a couple others you like too, as I can remember.
Yeah. And well, those are 2 I can name off the top of my head right now. But man, they were just amazing educators, and they really they were really passionate about their job. And I think teaching is something you have to be passionate about.
Enough otherwise.
Because then you have to take something like that very seriously. I don't think we value. I think we definitely look at the money. I think we definitely value athletes throwing a pigskin around over imaginary points more than how we educate our future generations, and that I think is a very troubling and disturbing fact.
Right.
And so I think that. Yeah, I have my qualms about the education system, and I think the education system is something that people on the left and the right we should all be
working together.
Working together.
The silver bullet to fix any of the major problems in the country is education. Right?
Yeah. I don't know, and I don't know if necessarily throwing more money at it. More money is the answer. Because we're getting beat on all these tests, by so many other countries out there that have like no funding compared to what we have, right? So it's not necessarily that money is like necessarily the answer, but I don't know. But I think there's a good argument for holding teachers to a higher standard. I think that's something I agree with the Scandinavian countries when they ask teachers to have a master's degree, they're paid more. Things like that. I think things like that definitely help weed out the people who are not going to take it seriously.
Oh, I 100% agree. If I had started teaching right out of undergrad, I feel like it would have been this research would never have happened, and B, I feel like I would have been a very different style of teacher than what I do now, right? As an educator now, I feel like, and educator is kind of in quotes, but, because I'm not in front of a classroom, but I do educate. So I feel like I would have a very different degree than after my master's degree. So I 100% agree. I also think some of it comes down to fundamentally, we look at education in this country as a business, right? Like we think about like how can we keep our public education cheap and efficient? How can we keep our private education expensive and good, right? Essentially, right? And I was like really, really lucky to go to like a private school for high school and have some of the best teachers in the state, right? And have amazing, amazing experiences. I went to a private school in New Jersey, and all of my high school teachers also taught at Rutgers.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
So like I was learning from college professors, right?
Wow.
And had an amazing experience and like learned how to write and learned how to think and learned how to do learned math in the way that I just described before, where like I learned how to do proofs before I learned the equations, right? So
Wow.
I had like a very different high school experience than most people did, but my parents would argue we paid for that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Sure.
and then so to your point about like if money isn't the answer, I definitely think money helps, right? Like those professors would teach at public schools if public school paid the same, you know?
Not to get, I mean, we're going to start diving into something political, and I don't mind that whatsoever. I hope you listeners don't mind that at all. But I think that this is something that people on the left and the right need to kind of come together a little bit. I think the people on the right need to see it as a nationalist move.
Yeah, it's an investment.
And I think the socialist people need to look at it the way they do, as in we need to devote tax dollars that are going towards all these wackadoo things that don't serve us, and take some of that spending and redirect it to something like education, where you're going to see more benefit when your children are coming out learning new languages and are 10 times smarter and all kinds of stuff like that, right? Because their teachers are held to a higher standard, or they have more opportunities via what's given to them and everything. I mean, you're talking about being in a bubble. The high school that I went to was, although it was public, we live in a semi-nice area, and so the education system is based a lot on local tax dollars. So
Good tax base.
well, right. Good. You get a better education system regardless of your financial state if you live in a nicer area where the taxes are better,
Right.
and where there's a lot of low income. Because there's less overall tax revenue for the local schools, the local public schools. Often they suffer on the education department, so they won't have like a metals class, they won't have a woods class, they won't have a videography class, they'll be fighting for musical programs, art programs, things like that, outside of the regular curriculum. And then even in the regular curriculum, they're going to have teachers that are not as passionate because they're hardly getting paid anything. So I think that's where I get a little weird, because I think there is a little bit of a caste system to all that, and I think that it's not fair, and if that means that someone like me, who had a really amazing high school experience, I feel like when I went to state ran college, that I was like almost downgrading from the amount of technology and things like that I had in my high school. That well, I mean, obviously for you, yeah, I didn't go to private school or anything, but it was like a huge downgrade going to college. That was a wild experience, I think, and so if that means that I don't get as good of a high school experience, so that other people who have next to nothing for their elective courses, or they're fighting for like music classes and everything, it's like, well, yeah, no, I don't think any of that's fair, and so that's where I do lean a little bit left. It would definitely be like something like education, because it's so important.
And it goes back to some of what we were talking about last week too, right? Like think about if we were educating people about how to eat healthy and how to do all this stuff. All stuff I learned in high school, right? Like we had to take these classes called life skills, right? Now it like hits with an ironic hammer, but primarily because I teach that class at UWL. But we all had to learn how to make a budget. We had to learn how to do taxes. We had to learn how to eat healthy and like how to buy healthy food at the grocery store. And like we had to take this class. It was part of graduating, right? And like everyone jokes about how like nobody taught them how to do taxes when they were in high school. And I was like, for a while, that didn't ever register for me because I learned how to do taxes in high school.
Yeah, we didn't learn any of that stuff.
See, yeah, and I think Zechariah, you had you had some things you could elective classes and stuff like that.
We had amazing elective opportunities, but like not every high school had anywhere near as many elective opportunities as I did.
I mean, this conversation has really gone from leadership going into more of the education area, which I know obviously there's a relationship. But I mean, so CP, I wanted to ask you now: do you think good teachers, in the leadership role, in the leadership way, do you think they are people who have great emotional intelligence?
I think so. I think the thing about my research that I've been finding more and more is that individuals have a tendency to be either a Leia or a Dorothy naturally. Like, so they naturally are a Leia or naturally are a Dorothy, but can be either if given the opportunities, right? So Dorothy's can be like Leia's if they have to be, and Leia's can be like Dorothy if they have to be. It's going to be an unnatural fit for them, but they can do that. I think teachers, to answer your question, who have high levels of emotional intelligence can understand that students are going to fit into these categories differently, right? So a Dorothy may feel like they have to present like a Leia because of the scenario that they're in, but somebody with a high level of emotional intelligence will be able to pull them back and say, you can be this kind of leader too, right? And be able to pull them out of what they've been taught their whole life to think of as leadership into a different style, and then vice versa. Somebody who feels like unempowered and not able to be a leader, they naturally tend to like default to everyone around them, which is what Dorothy's do, right? But those people may be the Leias that need to be out there in charge, right? And maybe their like passivity is what's causing a lack of development and growth in an organization.
Very interesting. Well, I definitely think ZP should be here for an education talk. Strictly an education talk.
For sure.
Oh, wow.
Definitely.
Holy wow. Well, I was very impressed you mentioned the golden ratio, and so definitely want to have some shows where we come back and revisit that as well. I have no idea what ZP's spiritual or religious views or their lack of may possibly be. But just for everyone listening right now, the golden ratio, if you want to look it up, some people call it the fingerprint of God. So, but anyway, this is all very interesting. I mean, leadership for me, when I think leadership that I see in life, I always think leadership by example is some of the best kind of leadership. If so many people I've seen in life, it's the hypocritical, do as I say, not as I do, more or less that kind of thing. I see people with a lot of just sort of a stupid form of arrogance and talking down to people too much. I see. I see, and then some of it's people as well. People just don't. Well, where's also the pursuit of leadership. You have to find. I always think you need to find this weird mix. I don't know what you think of this, ZP or Zach. Passive aggressive. I don't know. It's just this weird mix. I think when you think of good leadership, think of for me, I think of a coach. I think of a coach, and how does that then translate into the real world when you get to a boss, a supervisor? It's sort of something you have to, and I think it's really much the same way. A good athletic coach and a good boss in the workplace is a very similar kind of passive aggressive thing. You can't be again overly aggressive and just constantly barking at people, and then you can't be too nice to them either. Be too much of their friend 100% of the time too. Maybe sometimes,
Right.
But you can't be too passive either. So it's this weird mix and trying to find that balance on a daily basis, as well as juggle multiple different kind of personalities. And then that's what emotional intelligence, I think, comes in, because you got all this to juggle. So you got babysitting to do, and you got sometimes refereeing to do, and make sure the work gets done, and in an athletic case, make sure that your players are playing to the best of their capabilities, and so. It's always an interesting mix. So the human experience with all of our different personalities and psychologies all converging at the same time.
Yeah, to that point, I think that leaders are able to jump between different styles based on the needs of the people that they're leading, right? Obviously, Leia never asked her soldiers to do anything that she wouldn't do, right? So to your point about leading by example, she was always the first one in, last one out, right? But at the same time, if they didn't have Luke as that symbol of hope, then they wouldn't have gone anywhere, right? So it's this whole you have to be able to understand kind of both sides of it. I'm thinking about my own coaches from my own experiences fencing, right? Some of my coaches were very much here's how you do the actions, this is what you need to do, and just make sure that you do this perfectly. And then other coaches are I'm going to teach you all of the skills you need to do, and then you need to figure out how to win the bouts on your own. Right? Because I'm not going to be there on the sideline every single time you're fencing to tell you what to do. Right? And at times
I had a very similar experience with, I think it was a huge difference between, I do some martial arts, my Aikido senseis were very much like the Yoda style, where they would show you the technique, they would show you the technique again, they would show you the technique a third time, and they would say, all right, now do this. Right? And you go with a partner and you go do the thing. And the jiu-jitsu was kind of well, here's all the techniques. Now roll,
Right.
right, wrestle, right,
And that's how
grapple, and then you sort of understand the technique, but there's a lot of things that things like jujitsu and amateur wrestling that you can't teach, right? You don't know how much pressure to apply with your head or with your grip for different techniques, and it's always going to constantly change based on your opponent, right? And so those are kind of things you start to develop as you learn. And as you grapple, the more you wrestle, the more you start to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, what works for you against certain opponents and what doesn't, right? Based on their size, height, body mass, all that kind of stuff, right? So, I think that was something I definitely. You're talking about fencing and everything, and I definitely experienced that, and very polar opposite with Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu senseis for sure.
My Russian fencing coach was very much a Yoda. He was like, all right, we're going to drill parry sticks over and over and over. So the second you start feeling somebody putting resistance on it, like instantly your body is just going to react that way, right? And just constantly drill the same action. Great, because that means my parry six was awesome, but also like super predictable, right? So anybody who like knew that was going to come, like could immediately disengage and hit me in a different direction. My Ukrainian fencing coach was the opposite. He's like, you know how to do all the actions. We're just going to fence. We're going to teach you like how to like be creative and think about how everyone always describes fencing as like chess on your feet, right? So how you can think 5 or 6 moves ahead and how you can start setting up actual actions, right? And so to your point, right, like I was much more successful with my Ukrainian coach to the point where I eventually had to tell the U.S. team, I was like, you know what, I love Yakov, but this isn't working for me anymore. And they let Slava come with me on all of my tournaments, but Slava said to me all the time, you know, I'm never going to be there at every single bout that you fence, right? There's 15 of you all. I have to go around and coach everyone else too, right? So you need to be able to think with the skills I've given you to be successful, right? But if I had only ever been taught through Yakov's style or the Yoda style, I would have depended on Yakov to be there to tell me what to do. And I knew lots of fencers on the team that did, right? That needed him at every single bout, right? And they were successful, but that didn't feel like I was fencing anymore. It just felt like I was a robot, you know?
You also see this parallel. I'm trying to think of like maybe the Karate Kid is another good example of this too.
Yeah, we're coming back to the cinema again.
Yeah. Well, hey, cinema's got all the great.
Absolutely, no, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all the
well,
great
I have more cinema to say too, but go ahead.
Well, sure.
That's on my mind.
Well, I was going to say,
we're talking movies.
I think there's a really distinct leadership difference in how the Cobra Kai was teaching and how Mr. Miyagi taught. I forget the
Ralph Macchio.
Yeah,
that was Danielson.
Danielson.
Yeah. So there you have another great example too. I think it's a beautiful archetype, and it's not that one way is right or wrong, although in many stories it's depicted that way, right? But it's that there are multiple styles of leadership and multiple styles of teaching too, and I think that's a really just important thing to sort of embrace, regardless if you are trying to be a leader or you are like on the student role, right? Learning. Or if you're the one teaching, I think it's really, really important to kind of recognize that kind of stuff. So, what were you gonna start? You had some examples from cinema too, or?
Oh, I was gonna be a smart aleck and go off in a silly direction. So we're talking about Princess Leia, and of course Carrie Fisher passed away recently. So sad. They brought her back for some of these later Star Wars. Okay, because I haven't really kept up with it. But
CGI mostly, but yeah.
What was kind of funny for fans of Carrie Fisher, may she rest in peace, is that so the original Star Wars came out I think in 1977, and I forget when Empire Strikes Back came out, maybe a year or two later, and then 83 I think Return of the Jedi came out. But anyway, in between all that, Carrie Fisher does also play a character who gets her heart broken. And she doesn't just take it. She goes after him and tries to kill him. And I'm talking, of course, about Blues Brothers. And Carrie Fisher tries to go after John Belushi and tries to gun him down. And anyway, it's very funny and adds another funny dimension to the to the movie. Not that we advocate any violence, especially if anybody is heartbroken out there. There will be heartbreak. I'm sorry to say that in the human condition, but anyway. So no, I was just thinking more about Carrie Fisher and her career, and I also think it was funny about Mark Hamill. His career never really took off. I mean, he's done voiceover work and he's been around, and they brought him back. They bring him back for these later Star Wars a little bit.
Yeah.
A couple of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So good for him. But
he's a
he
huge
never
critic of these new Star Wars movies.
Oh, is he?
hated
Yeah.
them.
But his career never took off. Carrie Fisher's took off. Harrison Ford's really took off. You know,
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
and I thought Mark Hamill, was going to be the next big star when I was a kid. But it's just kind of funny that other people,
And I wonder how much of that was like his own choice versus just like never getting cast, because he did the Joker, and the Joker was amazing, right? Like the animated Batman series, if ever. I could talk about it forever.
Oh wow,
it's really good. Best.
Yeah,
version
I
of
mean, I grew
Batman
up with
in
it too. Yeah, it was.
In my opinion, the best version of Batman out there. And Mark Hamill's the Joker, in my opinion, is one of, if not the best version of the Joker. Maybe up there with Heath Ledger's.
wow.
And it's just because he's just unapologetically that character, right? Like he tells dark jokes and is funny and is also like when he needs to can flip the switch into being like super aggressive and cruel like the Joker can be, and feels very bipolar like the character is supposed to feel. It's that to me is like almost better than his Luke, but particularly.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, well, also, when he did the Joker, it was much later in his life and in his career, so I think there's something to experience and age and too. But oh yeah, no, that was definitely. I never even knew it was him. Obviously when I was watching it as a kid, I was like, oh yeah, this is just the Joker.
Well,
you don't think about that kind of stuff when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden later on in life, you're like, yeah, no, Mark Hamill, the guy that played Luke.
But he's got work, and
Joker.
he's
Like,
still working.
what?
Mark Hamill. I'm not trying to pick on him or anything. I was sort of surprised how that movie was so big, and I don't think any of them were really well known at the time. Harrison Ford, I think, had a part in American Graffiti, but
But then he went on to do Indiana Jones pretty shortly after
right,
that.
yeah.
But also Steven Spielberg, so.
Yeah, his career just, he's got a movie out right now, I believe, called The Wild, I think. But anyway, yeah, I don't know about you guys, but like for me, and I don't know how you do this. Again, I think it's a combination of the things you've talked about, ZP, and I think it's a combination of emotional intelligence, teachers reading students, coaches reading their players, and the human personalities, human psychology. But the best people in my life it's a weird combination of I have to like them a little bit, and I definitely have to respect them, and if I like them enough and I respect them, they have a way when they bring out the best in me is what I will want to impress them, and I will want to make them happy. I'm talking about supervisors and bosses more specifically, basically. Whereas other people, it's just like you have this, I don't know, toxic, caustic relationship with almost master-slave relationship with, and just, oh God, I hate you. Oh God, I hate you. Oh, God. It's a good thing I don't want to go to jail. Oh God.
Right?
Jeez. Anyway. Yeah, some days you go to work and you just, what I would do. Sometimes you just gotta go to the break room first before you have to start.
Yeah.
And have a little moment of zen.
Yeah. Get your coffee before you go
I'm here. I'm gonna make the best of it. It's gonna be a good day. It's gonna be a good day. I'm gonna try to put my best foot forward. And maybe you'll get through it. And of course you'll get through it. But anyway, those are just some of my random thoughts about leadership in the real world and how we all deal with each other.
And some of that comes back to, we know that students and employees that are happy in their jobs are more productive, right? I'm going to work way harder for someone that, like you said, I respect and I like than someone I don't, right? And in a position that I respect and I like and I care about than in one I don't. So I would totally agree that like work environment matters, right? And that's some of the translatability about the work that I do, which is partially why I won the grant, right? Is that this extends beyond just the college level, right? It extends beyond just how we teach leadership at college for college students, right? It extends into how we think about leadership more broadly, right? And think about leadership as more than just this like monolithic, like sage on the stage style of leadership, right? Like I'm going to show you and I'm going to do it and I'm going to be the one that like charts the course for the whole company. That's what the CEO does. If you think about what a CEO is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to empower all the other C-level executives to do their job, right? Like, but we don't think about it that way. We think about like the Steve Jobs of the world, right? Who's like, I am Apple, right? Versus the Teslas of the world, who was much more about his employees and making sure that everyone who worked with him felt like they had the ability and the creativity to be successful, right?
Yeah, they say there's some research out there, and God, I wish I could quote the research, but it says something like you can't really hold more than 150 substantial relations with people. And so once you start to go past that, it's based on two reasons. One is time. You only have so much time. Once you can't give enough time to people. Once you get past 150 people, there's just not enough hours in the day, minutes in the day. And the other one is memory. To have an actual meaningful relationship with someone, you have to have memories with them, and you have to be able to remember their name, their family, what they're passionate about, something akin, right? And so based on time and memory, we can't really hold more than 150 substantial relationships at one time.
And that's a lot.
And that is a lot, yeah. Like some people are like, that's nothing. And it's
cut
like,
in half
yeah,
of it. 70,
okay,
cut
college
in half.
kid.
75 is a lot.
Yeah. So, well, right. So, and I think that includes not only like friends or workplace people, but also family, right? So, like in your family, depending on how big your family is, you might have someone who you're sort of acquaintances with, a cousin, a grandparent, or something. Maybe you don't see them all the time. You're more acquaintances than you are close. And then there are some cousins, there are some siblings, there are some grandparents that you are so close with, right? Maybe you get together once a week and you have a family meal, right? Or you always go to the movies once a month, or you always talk on the phone once a month about whatever is going on in the world. There are some people that you are just super, super close with. So it's true not only for the workplace, but also your friends and family. And because of that, like you're saying, it isn't that Steve Jobs, I care about my employees. Like you don't know more than 150 of these people closely, right?
Right.
Like there's no way you know more than 150 of these people. Like you know them. You know what they're passionate about. You know what their least favorite food is, or their food allergies, or whatever, right? Or what trouble they're gonna have going on at home, the red devils that they're wrestling with. It's like you don't know them. You don't really care about them. It's this very superficial statement. But what you can say is you have these core values that you teach your executives, and then you hope that your core executives will teach the executives below them, the managers below them, and that those managers will hold those same values and hold their workers accountable to, right? And that's what, like on the CEO level, where this leadership can be very, very helpful as well, is like, that's the kind of stuff that's true. And yeah, there's so much of that superficial kind of leadership out there. Like, I care about all my employees. Like, you don't know any of them.
Like cult personality idea, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
Again, like we see that playing out, particularly in politics. I think we see the cult of personality play out a lot.
Sadly,
on
yes,
both sides.
On both sides. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like on both sides of the political spectrum, we see that play out. But to your point, right? What is a politician really supposed to do, right? It's supposed to do exactly what you're saying, right? Like impart the values that their constituents are saying that they vote them in to do for the country, right? And that's what a CEO is supposed to do. It's like every company has a mission statement. Every company has a core value system. I don't know enough about how Apple's like internal workings work to continue that kind of train of thought, but I do know Blizzard Entertainment, for example, a huge nerd over here, but Blizzard Entertainment has like several core value system, like core values, one of which is like embrace the inner nerd, one of them is like think creatively, one of them is think globally, right? They have those things all over their headquarters, right? If you ever take
For those of you who are listening who aren't aware of what Blizzard is, maybe you've heard of World of Warcraft, a very popular video game that they did.
Yeah, StarCraft, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Diablo series. But all over their headquarters, each of their buildings holds a different one of those values and is a part of their inner core system, right? All of their paper, that if you just pick up random pieces of paper there, have their values at the top of it, right? Everything that they do is based around making sure all of their employees know their core value system and doing what you say, like empowering the leaders above them to impart those values downward in every level.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, it's been a wonderful discussion here.
Yeah.
Um,
And some of these topics we'll revisit again. Maybe we'll get one bit more about education. I think ZP would have an awful lot to say about the educational system. There's so much attached to that. But I think this has been a pretty good leadership show today. And good luck to
Yeah.
all the leaders out there. And hope you inspire all of your players and your employees and your students and bring out the very best in them.
Absolutely. All right, till next time. Thanks for listening.